heard of. And the last time I played it was like 1999 or 2000. I was amazed it's still around. In the 1980s, Black Flag were very much a hand-to-mouth kind of. You're always in an indie band in those days. You're kind of sort of always broke, and so we would play there. And quite often after the show, which would be a lot of people drinking, but like never antagonistic towards us, but just having a really good time. Quite often there'd be like a house party in our honor. Like someone would have a house and there's beer and weed and a washing machine. And someone's friend has made lasagna so we could eat. And so I've always understood Alabama's a really cool place. And so I'm really sorry that this is the first time I've ever played here, because the audience tonight I thought was fantastic. This venue is amazing. And so being small of fame as I am, I get the shows that I get. And so I'm lucky to get what I get. So I always say yes to a show. And so why this is the first time, I don't know. But just I want you to understand, it was never me saying no, because I don't say no to shows. And so tonight was show 103, 104 for the year in country number 27. So Red Manager Ward, the friendly Australian who took your photo, he and I have been quite busy, and we've been orbiting the globe since 2006 or 7, and COVID was really awful for us, awful for everybody, I know. But we just saw entire tours go away, the whole tour gone in one email. And it wasn't we'll try again in 2 months, it was we'll try again this time next year, which is really hard on the morale. And so finally, last year, in March of last year, the tour finally started, and we felt like two guys who had won the lottery. And we've been out basically on and off, mostly on, since spring of last year, and the tour ends November 21st of this year in Tallahassee, at about 260 some shows over the 2 years. And I'll be very sorry to see it go. And so the reason we're all here tonight is, it was an attempt we started a few years ago to establish some kind of middle ground, in that my old routine used to be, and some of you people might remember this, I finish a show, and it's very much like the show you saw tonight. I talk for way too long at high rate of speed, and I stagger out of the back of the building, and there's a large fraction of that night's audience waiting for me by the bus, because they know my punk rock ethos is you do not blow people off. You don't say, hey kid, you bother me. I can't do that. And so it would take another 60 to 80 minutes to deal with all the people by the bus. And the problem wasn't what we call the punishers, the people who show up with a bag of old records of yours that you sign and they put on eBay. That's capitalism. I totally understand that. The difficult part was the fact that some people had really horrible things happen to them, which is sad, but they would tell me about it. And this is all drawn from real stories. I think I was in Austin or Houston a few tours ago, and I'm talking to people, and a guy comes up and says, hey, me and my brother, we used to come and see you, that's our thing. He went to Afghanistan, he died, and so now it's just me. And so the family made this bracelet with his birth date and his death date. We've been giving them to people, and I want you to have mine. And I put it on, I'm like, this is really bad news. What do you say? You're sorry? It doesn't really work. I'm like, man, I don't know what to say. I'm so damn sorry. And then you hear a woman crying. Now what's happening? There's a woman crying, and she runs over to this guy. She's like, I just lost my brother in Afghanistan too. And now there's 2 weeping people, and the rest of us are all standing there like spectators, okay, intense. And so these kind of stories would be told to me over and over again, night after night, between 0 to 2 times a night. My best friend killed himself. Here's one of his rings. I want you to have it. I'm a person with a psyche like you. I'm not immune to feeling bad about things. I'm not a tough guy. You can get to me really easy. And so I would go back to my coffin-like bunk with these stories. And you give me 6 weeks on tour, then give me 50 weeks on tour. And now I have an anthology of bad stories in my head. And so we had a big meeting a few tours ago. Me, road manager Ward, Heidi, the big boss, and we're all at CAA, the big agency in Century City, right next to Beverly Hills, in their gleaming tower. And one of the agents says, Henry, is there anything about touring you'd like to change? I'm like, yeah. And he said, what? I said, I can't do that post-show hangout by the bus anymore. I like these people more than they'll ever understand. I cannot take the psychic battering. This is 185 shows coming up. I can't take 185 times whatever that might happen. And there's no regulation on this event. It goes until people finally leave. And I just can't take it. And of course, Heidi, she's always mad at me. I told you to stop doing that 10 years ago, which is probably true. And so we started this. where we have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You're not being rained on. You're not vying for position. You're not being crowded up by punishers. And so you get a cool photo. And so when this was told to me that this would be a possibility for the post-show, I said, it's got to be more than that. Otherwise, it just seems like all I want is your money. And believe it or not, that's really not what I'm after. I'm after the desire to communicate with you. And so I said, there has to be something more. And Heidi and Ward are both really intelligent people. And one of them said, how about this? A Q&A, where the questions come from the audience, and you'll answer them completely and honestly. I said, let's try that. And so we are in our third or fourth year of this. And I got questions from some of you. They're in my back pocket, and I'm going to answer them honestly and completely. And if there's any anecdotal rabbit holes I can disappear down, I'm going to do that. And so this isn't another 3 hours, but it's not 5 minutes. It's right in the middle. So I'm going to answer these questions, and the desire is every one of these get-togethers is like a snowflake. It's not like last night because the questions were different building, different people. Day after tomorrow, what will it be? I don't know. I haven't gotten there yet. What will the questions be? We'll see. And so Road Manager Ward, he knows me very well. He picks out questions that even I can answer because he knows the severe limits of my intellectual pay grade. And so I got these questions. So I'm going to stop talking now and start talking. Of all the places you've ever been, which places surprised you and why? And I don't know if I talked about it tonight, but I've been to about 90 countries. And this year, 27 or 28 countries. And usually those 27 countries are countries I've been to before. Like Switzerland, I don't know how many times. Germany, I've probably been to Germany more times than I've been in my own bed. And so in the 1990s, late 1990s, I wanted to go to places where there wasn't a stage waiting for me to maybe learn about Homo sapiens in non-Western environments. And that's when I started going to different parts of the African continent, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, the Middle East. And so I've been to places like Afghanistan and Iraq with the USO, North Korea, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Saudi Arabia, all over the African continent, over 20 trips there. And places like Mongolia, China, and on and on. And so these places are amazing to me. And to meet people in non-Western environments where in a lot of African tribes of people I've met, I always have a translator so I can get information. And I ask them, what is the word or idea that you have for retirement? And they go, well, what do you mean? And so it has to get translated. Well, when you're too old to go get the water, what do? You have a health plan? They're like, well, no, you have your family. When you're too old to go hunt for dinner, your son and his family, their children take care of you. We remain a unit, okay? So what about a vacation? What? A vacation. You bail out of here for a week, you sit on the beach, and you come back. And they're like, why would you want to leave the village? The kids are here, the family's here, the food is here. This is why you live, to be with a family. Leave? I wouldn't want to leave for a minute. And I started learning about how other people live all over the world, where we in the West, you want food? None of you are going to starve to death. You're going to die of something, no time soon, but it won't be starvation, not in this country. And so there's other parts of the world where starvation is a thing. Where you drink bad water, it could kill a kid. Because the little body, and I've met a lot of kids in Madagascar or South Sudan, you see the death in the eyes. They're not going to become 20. I've even seen in parts of Haiti, some orphans left behind by the earthquake. So I've learned a lot from these countries, and a couple of the places that really stand out were the countries or the land masses that were the most inhospitable to human life. And one of those would be Afghanistan, which I went a couple of times, a member of the USO. And the first time I went, I'm meeting a bunch of soldiers, I'm camping out at Bagram Air Base, and I'm going out to Gardez and Coast and other bases by day via Chinook helicopter or Black Hawk helicopter. By the time I went back the second time, I'd read this many books on Afghanistan. Everything from the invasion of Alexander the Great through the Mongols, the Brits, the Soviets, and then, of course, our incursion into that country. And so I had a bunch of questions. And so I started wearing out Sergeant Major Green, who runs the Bagram Air Base. He's like, you got too many questions. He turned me over to an ex-Mujahideen fighter who now is a resident on the base. He's a translator, and he helps get intel, get information from the bad guys, keep American soldiers alive, make it better for the residents of Afghanistan. And so Choppering all over Afghanistan, I was allowed to take extracurricular trips due to my curiosity and my hookup with Sergeant Major Green. Like, there's a mission going out today, you can tag along, but you have to stand in the back. I would go just for the ride, to see parts of Afghanistan I'm not gonna see any other way. I became fascinated with Afghanistan because there's not one square inch of it I've ever seen that looks like it possibly supports human life. Yet, there's all these people living there. And I'll never forget, we're in a Chinook helicopter, the big ones. You could load like your whole family in a truck onto that thing. It's like a UPS truck, 2 propellers. We're going over the top of a mountain range, completely covered in snow. And the temperature is brutal. I look out the front of the Chinook, and walking on the ridge of this mountain is one guy, like just like walking. Like, there's no civilization anywhere near this guy. What's he doing up there? And like, these are these insanely tough, really angry people. These mujahideen fighters. They kicked the Soviets out. We helped, but they took a lot of bullets. And so that was one of the most fascinating parts of the world. If I could go somewhere for 6 weeks and not get beheaded or kidnapped, I'd go back to Afghanistan, because there's just so much more I want to know. I want to hike through the Hindu Kush. I want to hike through the Panjshir Valley. I just want to get more stories. But you can get your head cut off there. So I'm not looking for that kind of adventure. Also, I saw a similar tough group of people in Siberia. Years ago, I took the Trans-Siberian Express from Moscow to Vladivostok, the longest train ride in the world. It's a week. And by day 3, there's nothing but frozen, nothing. There's not even wilderness. It's just snow. And then you pull up to a train platform. People live in the middle of nowhere. In Siberia, and apparently during the summer, it's nothing but clouds of mosquitoes. So you get clouds of mosquitoes in the summer, and a cold that was such where you literally, I tried this as an experiment and it worked. You spit into the air, the spit lands frozen. And I did it every single day on every train platform I stood on in my 7 days crossing to Vladivostok that has the Soviet Pacific Fleet. And so there are people who live there, and their faces are red from being out in the cold so much, and their hands are red, and they're brutal. And they live there, and historically, from my reading, people started moving to Siberia to get away from Joseph Stalin. Basically, the further you're away from Moscow or St. Petersburg, the less chance you have of getting disappeared for a radical thought or saying you like art or something like that. And so those 2 places, including one other, my time in the Sahara Desert, basically out of Timbuktu in Mali. I would go there for the Desert Music Festival and live under a slab of camel skin for a week at a time, digging Tuareg music. As I buy the records, but I want to see the bands play it in the sand with generators. And I would hang out with Tuareg tribesmen who live in the middle of what looks like planet Earth covered in sand. There's not one damn thing growing. And out of nowhere, here come these guys on camels. And they don't speak English, and one guy named Mahmoud, he's a Tuareg guy, he would translate for me. Like, what do you guys eat? And they pull out like dried nuts and dried bits of fruit, like, have some. I'm like, no, you keep it. You need the food. I got 150 Cliff Bars in my backpack. And how these people carve out an existence. Ryszard Kapuscinski, the great Polish journalist, he passed away. In his book, Shadow of the Sun, his journalism from Africa, he talks about how about 9/10 of the world's surface does not want humankind to exist. Yet we persist and we keep showing up in these inhospitable environments. And that was proof, these places I've seen. So the least hospitable towards human life a place is, the more it fascinates me. Because I just want to know, how are you getting through this? Because I can barely last 5 days. And so that hopefully answers that question. And I wish I could go to Afghanistan and learn more. I wish I could go back to Pakistan or North Korea, but I just don't think those places will be open for me in my lifetime. Here's a much lighter question. It's a good one. Eddie Van Halen, in his biography, he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, if you put out a record of new music, a critic will say, well, it's not as good as the old music used to be. If you put out a record that sounds like old music, a critic will say, I've heard that before. I would dare to say Eddie Van Halen, who I'm a huge fan of, on that particular sentiment is a little bit cynical. And I would dare to say I know every single second of every Van Halen record that features David Lee Roth. I also have all the bootlegs. I am a fan since I first heard Running with the Devil. And so as far as what do I think about that quote, I've never thought that way, because I've done my best to never care what a critic ever thinks about anything I've ever tried to do artistically or creatively. Because no matter what you do, like your favorite record, that record, which is probably great, it got a 1-star review somewhere. Someone panned it. Your favorite movie, someone thought it was a piece of crap. And no matter what you do, someone is there to let the air out of your tires. Years ago, I read an article about George Clooney, who I think is a great actor. He donated that he does that Nespresso ad. It's a multi-million-dollar a year deal he has, like $5 million a year, to have a gray beard and hang out with a coffee machine. I want that job. Anyway, he took all of that money and he donated it to South Sudan, the newest country in the world, because they now have a border with the North. And the North is coming down there and predating upon Kuku, Acholi, Mundari, and Dinka people. And so he took his millions of dollars and set up drones with the government of South Sudan to monitor the border and allow South Sudan to keep back northern soldiers. And so I read the postings underneath this article. This guy doesn't have to do anything for anyone. He's got his amazing wife and his kids. He can just tell you to piss up a rope. But he did that. And there's the postings underneath. Must be nice to be a big movie star, get to do. Like, really? Like no matter what you do, someone's there going, your thing sucks. And so maybe Eddie was very sensitive to a bad review. And Van Halen used to get him. And so I don't know. I would have advised Mr. Van Halen to not give a damn about what anyone thinks about what he did. And so the first time I saw Van Halen was 1978 or 79. Their first album had just come out. And traditionally, Ian MacKay and I used to go see Ted Nugent. This is before he was talking between songs. We would see Ted Nugent play every time he came through the Washington, D.C. area. And I know, he's got a mouth on him, but he's also a really good guitar player. And so his old band, before they all got tired of him and left, they were a bunch of Detroit monster players. I mean, they were great. And he would go out there, his band were all in torn t-shirts and ragged gear, and they would destroy for like 2.5 hours. And it was as good as you'd hoped it would be. He's a really good player. And like Derek St. Holmes, great rhythm guitar player and singer. It's a great night of rock and roll. And he and I would like leave that electrified and completely trampled. And then Ted Nugent puts out the first of his many awful albums called Weekend Warrior. And of course, I buy it for $4.99 at Kent Mill Records because I have a job. And Ian and I buy our ticket to see Ted Nugent and his new band, who aren't that good, especially the rhythm section. And who's opening? This band called Van Halen. And all I've heard is Running with the Devil on the radio. And so we're there at the Capitol Center in Largo, Maryland. It's now a parking lot. And out comes Van Halen. And we both know about the one song. They open with Running with the Devil. Like, this is cool. It's a bunch of 19 or 20-year-olds. They're really young. They're on their first album tour. They play 35 minutes. I remember David Lee Roth acting like the show was his to headline. Hey, DC, great to be back. They've never played there before. And he's like so large and in charge. You kind of buy and you're like, who's this guy? And then Eddie Van Halen, everyone gets out of the way, and Eddie Van Halen does Eruption, this amazing solo guitar thing. And 20,000 people stand up, and he finishes. And there's no sound, because everyone's jaw is on the ground. And I'll never forget this. Eddie picks his hands up and flicks it out and looks at them like, I have no idea what I just did. And finally, and people like run out to the merch booth, and they're buying those Raglan Baseballs t-shirts with that little tiny Van Halen logo. They put in a bad merch order. The logo's way too small. Their shirts are probably worth $8,000 now, but they're hilarious. Like, the V is about this big. By the time Ted Nugent goes on, half of the audience is wearing Van Halen shirts or waving them in front of him. And Ted Nugent is going out and laying one egg after another. The new songs suck. He's now covering a Beatles song. Don't cover a Beatles song. They did it better than you. And so this show sucks. And people are now coming close to the stage like, and you're going, Van Halen! If you're a punter who goes to arena rock shows, you're very sure that the act on stage cannot hear a single word you're saying because you are the faceless rabble. So they're all yelling, Van Halen. Ian and I are like way over here in the cheap seats. It's all we can afford. Like, well, nothing will happen. Ted Nugent heard the people up front yelling Van Halen. And so the veil is broken. He comes to the front of the stage, he grabs the mic, and he's like, F Van Halen. 25,000 people dive on the ground like that scene out of Life of Brian. Everyone is howling in laughter because the big guy just bought in. And for the rest of the show, he puts one foot on a wedge monitor and he faces the ground and he plays the whole show facing the floor. And he basically, here's your encore, Cat Scratch Fever, good night, I'm out. And so we all bought the Van Halen album as soon as we could. And so that's how I got into Van Halen, one of the best damn shows I saw as a youngster. A few years later, I'm in some band called Black Flag. Black Flag's albums are drawn, the cover art, Raymond Pettibone, who's now worth about $150 million. He's the successful one. Ray doesn't like to talk. So Ray says, hey, come into Hollywood with me. I have to drop off some artwork. And so we go to drop off some artwork of his to a punk rock group showing at a place called the 01 Gallery. And I do all the talking for Ray. Hey, this is Ray, here's his artwork. We'll come back in 5 days to pick it up. If you've not sold it, $25 each, we want that money. And so Ray and I are leaving the 01 Gallery, and there's a bunch of Hollywood hipsters there. And we're walking the doors this way. We're walking by on our left. There's a short guy with sunglasses on, standing next to a big bodyguard-looking guy in a full suit. We walk by, and I'm looking at, it looks like an art installation. Short rock guy, big, square-shouldered bodyguard guy who looks like he's capable of ripping your freaking head off. We're walking by, and a punk rock female, like tank top on, mohawk, beautiful. I'm young, she's young. I'm like, ugh. And she walks by, and I look at her like I'm heterosexually inclined. I look. The guy with the short rock guy with the sunglasses, he pulls his sunglasses down and scopes the woman, and then his eyes snap back to me, and he goes and I was like, I guess. And we keep on walking. That's weird. And then the small rock guy goes Black Flag. I'm like, yeah. He goes Diamond David Lee Roth. I'm like, you're the Van Halen guy. He's wearing sunglasses. I couldn't see. And he goes you want a beer? And the bodyguard guy, Big Ed, all of a sudden goes into this robotic mode. And he whips open his jacket, and there's a beer can in his breast pocket. He's I go, no thanks, I don't drink. And I was whoa, you're pretty cool, right? Yeah. And I said, Dave, I've always wanted to tell you this story. I saw you obliterate Ted Nugent in my senior year of high school. He goes, where was the show? I said, the Capitol Center. He's Capitol Center, Largo, Maryland, $12,394 paid, and we did $1,135 in merchandise that night. I said, are those numbers accurate? He's no, but it sounded good, didn't it? I'm wow. And it's an interesting friendship that continues to this day. That's how I met David Lee Roth. And if you look at his autobiography, Crazy from the Heat, you'll see my name in the back, because I actually got him his book deal. And so that's why I'm mentioned in the book. I spent about 19 months of my life working on that autobiography with David Lee Roth. I know way too much about David Lee Roth. And so, again, the question, I think Eddie shouldn't have been so sensitive about critics because he's such a good player. LA bands that don't get the credit they deserve. And in this question, the person says, I think the band that didn't get enough credit was the band X. I could not agree more. I've seen X, it's an LA punk rock band. They're kind of a staple. They've been around since 77 or 78. They still play to this day. Exene on vocals, John Doe on vocals, DJ Bonebreak on drums, and Mr. Wonderful on guitar. Anyway, I don't like him, so I'm not going to say his name. Anyway, so I used to see X back in the 1980s.